sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Then in verse 2, when you look at the last part, you'll see that it was Satan, the dragon. In Revelation 12, verse 9, it identifies the dragon as Satan the devil, that old serpent. He's the one who is going to give rise to this end-time system today as we're living. And probably every one of us will see the end of the age if we just live in normal times. But of course we know normal times are not going to be here in the next few years. In verse 4 it says, they worship the dragon. That's Satan the devil. He's the one who is going to give power to the beast, and individuals will worship the beast, but at the same time, they will be worshiping the one behind the beast, who is Satan the devil. They'll not realize it though. In chapter 17 of Revelation, in verse 3, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast. So here is an end-time church, and it's going to sit upon a scarlet-colored beast. So there is coming apostasy. There's going to be a church, and it will use the name of Christ. It really will. And yet it will not be the one and only true church of the living God, nor will it keep His way of life. And therefore, it'll be a false church. It's going to ride, it says, a scarlet-colored beast. The word scarlet is a derivative from red. So that means there is coming at the end of the age a system that is going to use religion. Because in chapter 17, down in verse 18, this system is going to destroy the church that aids its rise to world power. So whatever this church is, it will be destroyed. It'll not live on after the beast comes into its final fruition. In 1776, a man by the name of Adam Weishaupt founded the order of the Illuminati. The word Illuminati means Luciferian worship. It means the enlightened ones. These individuals all worship Lucifer by name. He brought into his organization a group of people, about 2,000 of them to start with. These were the most elite people in Europe and mainly in Germany at that time. He saw to it that every one of these individuals bound themselves through oaths. These oaths, and I will quote a part of what they had to do. They had to bind themselves to perpetual silence and unshakable loyalty and submission to the order. So the Illuminati was not something that you went into lightly. You could never leave the order of the Illuminati with your life once you went into it. If you knew the secrets as to what they were going to do and prepare for world government and the worship of Lucifer, and you tried to leave the order, notice what they said, and this is a part of the initiation that you took. Loyalty and submission to the order in the persons of my superiors, here making a faithful and complete surrender of my private judgment. If you went into this order of your own will, you surrendered your own thought processes from that day forward. Whatever they said to you, they gave you the orders, and you did it willfully and never questioned what they said. I will surrender my own will and every narrow-minded employment of my own power and influence. And they go on in this oath and must quote and state that if they ever try to leave the order of the Illuminati, then every member of the Illuminati will go after them, and they will destroy them economically first, and then they will take their life. All this information was found in the book Proofs of a Conspiracy, the 1967 edition, page 71. Now, by the time a member of the Illuminati had reached what was called the inner circle, they had 3 circles. and they would take people who they thought might be a candidate for their true knowledge of world government, and they would watch them for years, and then they would bring them into the next circle. They had 3 circles, and when they came into the inner circle, they knew all the secrets. They knew the following secrets of the Illuminati. Number 1, their goal was to abolish all ordered government on earth and set up a new order of the ages called the Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new order of the ages. Number 2, they would abolish private property. Number 3, they would abolish inheritance. Number 4, they would abolish patriotism and create a one-world state where there would be no borders. Many of you may remember John Lennon's song that he put out and is still played today, where it talks about communism. There'll be no heaven, no religion, no boundaries. It will be just one world. That was a communistic song. Number 5, they would abolish all religion except one, the worship of Lucifer. Number 6, they would abolish the family, marriage and morality, and the proper education of our children as we have known it in the past. Just look around us today and see if this isn't happening. And number 7, the final objective would be the creation of a world government. Naturally, most of the members were never allowed, were simply benevolent world government so that everybody would be happy. The whole human race would be happy. But of course, this was not the case at all. On the 16th of July in 1782, there was a conference of all Freemasonic orders all over the world. This was the Congress of Wilhelmsbad. At this particular Congress, the order of the Illuminati and all Freemasonry groups all over the world merged. I'm going to quote what one man who was an honest Freemason stated as to what happened at that particular Congress. I will quote the book World Revolution by Nesta Webster. This was written in 1921, page 18. I quote, "When questioned on the tragic secrets he had brought back with him, he replied, 'I'll not confide them to you. I can only tell you that all this is very much more serious than you think. The conspiracy which has been woven,'" and notice he used the word conspiracy. Satan is the greatest conspirator of them all. He said the conspiracy which has been woven is so well thought out that it will be impossible for the monarch and the church to escape from it. From that time on, his biographer could only speak of Freemasonry with horror. End of quote. So the amalgamation of the order of the Illuminati and Freemasonry happened in 1782. Now, I want to state that most people in Freemasonry do not even have any idea as to what is truly going on, and I'll mention that in just a moment. But in Europe, and especially in Germany, the Bavarian province, people became intensely interested in the activities of the Illuminati as a direct result of information that continued to leak out. In 1785, 4 leading members of the Illuminati, directly under Adam Weishaupt, defected from the organization and took asylum with the government of Bavaria. They testified before court. It was called the Court of Inquiry, and this was called by the Elector of Bavaria. They testified as to the activities of the Illuminati. As a direct result, in October of 1785, they raided the second man in command's house next to Adam Weishaupt. His name was Zwack. And they found absolute proof, and I will quote from that document, of a universal revolution that should deal the death blow to society. This revolution will be the work of the secret societies, and that is one of our great mysteries. End of quote. So All of the secret societies have mysteries. When you look in the book of Revelation, it says, Mystery Babylon the Great. Look up the word mystery in the Strong's Concordance of the Greek language. It means to cover the mouth. It means to be initiated as in secret into a religious rite. And that's exactly what the Order of the Illuminati and all Freemasons are required to do. And it must remain secret at all times. Now, the dreadful danger that was posed by the Illuminati became very clear to the Bavarian government. As a direct result, they decided that they would let the documents speak for themselves. So, they wrote a book. They put it in writing, and they sent it to every government on the continent of Europe, including England. It was called the Original Writings of the Sect and Order of the Illuminati. Apparently, these governments didn't think much of the idea that there was a conspiracy to overthrow them, because nothing was done about it, and none of the documents ever got into the hands of the individuals who could have done something about it. So the Order of the Illuminati started the approximate time of the American Revolution. And since the American Revolution was already underway, probably the Illuminati had little to nothing to do with our revolution. However, within a matter of years after we were established as a constitutional republic, to be exact, even before the Constitution was adopted, before we were even united as the United States of America, we were still 13 separate colonies. Notice what happened. There were 15 lodges of the Order of the Illuminati founded in the 13 original colonies. The Columbian Lodge of the Order of the Illuminati was established in New York City in 1785. See if you remember these names from back in your history lessons. These were members of that original Illuminati Lodge in New York City. Governor DeWitt Clinton of New York, Charles Dana, and Horace Greeley. All of these were original members of the Illuminati in New York City. Then following that, another lodge was established in Virginia. This was 1786. The one person that most of us would identify with that was a member of that lodge was Thomas Jefferson. We don't have enough history really to bear out as to whether he understood their goals and was actually a member of it for the overthrow of all governments or not. So we'll just pass by him at this time. But there was one interesting thing. When the Bavarian government went in and raided the home of Zwack, and also Adam Weishaupt had to flee for his life outside of Germany, Thomas Jefferson defended him as a wonderful man who only wanted a benevolent government for the good of all mankind. So whether that would indicate that he was a member of the Illuminati with full understanding or not, I don't know. Many other people warned about the rise of the Illuminati in the United States. On July 19th of 1798, a Mr. David Papin, P-A-P-P-E-N, who was the president of Harvard University, issued a very strong warning about the influence that had already taken place in the original colonies of Illuminism, as they called it at that time. On the graduating class, he gave a lecture to them and warned them that they would have to secure their freedoms and never let down because of the Illuminati's threat of world government. Also, President Timothy Dwight of Yale University gave a similar warning in 1798 to his graduating class. And yet, just 34 years later, Yale University had a secret organization start in 1832. It's called the Order, nicknamed Skull and Bones, where they initiate 15 men into it each year. They must be the elite of the world from the Eastern Socialist establishment. Some of those people that have been a part of that and initiated was Mr. Prescott Bush and his son, President President of the United States, Mr. George Bush. In 1798 also, George Washington sent a letter to a Mr. G.W. Snyder. In that letter, here's what he stated, and I quote, "It is not my intention to doubt that the doctrine of the Illuminati and the principles of it had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more satisfied of this fact than I am." End of quote. This came from the writings of George Washington that was published by the United States Government Printing Office in 1941, Volume 20, page 518. So we did have many of our founding fathers just a few years after our inception as a government to warn us about a government that had, or a group of individuals who had sworn to secrecy to overthrow all existing governments for a world society. In 1829, an American Illuminist sponsored a program in the state of New York and in New York City. They invited a woman from England who was an English socialist or Illuminati member by the name of Frances Wright. Her nickname was Fanny. I wasn't there then, so I don't know why. But anyway, she advocated the entire Adam Weishaupt program of a new world order. Only she brought in for the first time a new name that had never been heard before. This name was called communism. For the first time in 1829, she told the Illuminati members in the city of New York how they would make this acceptable to the public. They would do it by using a label called equal opportunity. This was 1829. In the year of 1990s, in this decade, do we know of equal opportunity? She also said that communism or socialism would be palatable to the public by using another term called equal rights. That was 1829. Do we hear that today? She said that they would combine all the atheists and the nihilists who are revolutionaries, form them together, and they would be the communist movement. This new destructive force, she said, was to be used to foment wars and revolutions all over the world. This would prepare for the destabilization of every government on earth to prepare it for their Novus Ordo Seclorum. Incidentally, that same phrase is on the back of your $1 bills. Notice the names of the men who were to raise funds to carry out this program of communism in the United States. One man's name was Clinton Roosevelt, a direct ancestor of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Remember, Mr. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was brought into office in the 1930s during the Depression, and he brought in a New Deal for us. That New Deal was the first step towards socializing America to merge it into a world government with the Soviet Union. Another man who was to help raise funds for communism in America was a Mr. Charles Dana, and then Horace Greeley. These three formed the committee to raise the funds for this new socialistic, communistic undertaking in the New World. In 1834, a Mr. Giuseppe Mazzini, he was an Italian revolutionary who headed up the Illuminati wing in Europe. He was made worldwide revolutionary director for the Illuminati all over the world. He held this position until he died in 1872. About the same time that Giuseppe Mazzini took over the revolutionary program, and within the next 15 years, another intellectual on the European continent came along. His name was Moses Mordecai Marx Levy. Most of us know him as Karl Marx. He joined a branch of the Illuminati called the League of the Just. In 1847, he was hired by the House of Rothschilds of London, England, Berlin, Germany, to write what is called today the Communist Manifesto. This was nothing more than the rehashing. It was actually written practically word for word straight out of Adam Weishaupt's original writings of the Illuminati. To show you the little importance of Karl Marx, it was probably 20 years after he wrote the Communist Manifesto before his name was ever attached to it. That shows how little importance he was to the Illuminati and the conspiracy for world government. The next important personality that came along on the American scene was a man by the name of Albert Pike. He spoke 7 languages fluently. He worshiped Satan, only he wouldn't use the name Satan. He used the name Lucifer. And he later had an argument with the successor to Giuseppe Mazzini over what their God should be called, whether it would be Lucifer or Satan. And he won out, and so they called him Lucifer. Giuseppe Mazzini selected Albert Pike to head up operations in the United States. In a very fascinating letter that Albert Pike wrote, dated January 22nd of 1870, and this is taken from the book Occult Theocracy by Lady Queensborough of England, page 208, 209. Here's what she said, quote, this is the letter she put in her book directly from the Historical Museum of London, England. This is what Pike wrote to Giuseppe Mazzini. We must allow all the Masonic federations to continue just as they are, with their systems, their central authorities, and their diverse modes of correspondence between high grades of the same rite, organized as they are at present. In other words, he's saying, let's not disturb them or let them know that we're going to use them. Notice what he says. But we must create a super rite, which will remain unknown, to which we will call those Masons of high degree whom we shall select. With regard to our brothers in Masonry, these men must be pledged to the strictest of secrecy. Through this supreme rite, we will govern all Freemasonry, which will become the one international center, the more powerful because its direction will be unknown. End of quote. So here is Freemasonry in every nation on earth. All nationalities, all type of religious beliefs can belong to Freemasonic lodges. And yet here is an organization in secret superimposed over Freemasonry. The lower ranks don't even know that they exist. And they are the ones that call the shots and hand the orders down to the simple-minded individuals who do not know that there is a world conspiracy. And so the people in the lower echelons of Freemasonry carry out the program and don't even know that they're working for world government and for Lucifer. Here's what a historian by the name of Domenico Margatti from Europe says in his book called Andrea Lemmi, page 97. Andrea Lemmi was the successor to Giuseppe Mazzini after he died in 1872. Quote, it was agreed that the existence of this rite would be kept strictly secret, and that no mention of it would ever be made in the assemblies of the lodges and the inner shrines of other rites, even when by accident the meeting might happen to be composed exclusively of brothers having the perfect initiation. So even if it was only those who were working for world government and worshiped Lucifer and they had been selected to understand, they would never mention its name inside the walls of a Masonic lodge. For the secret of the new institution was only to be divulged with the greatest caution to a chosen few belonging to the ordinary high grades. End of quote. So only a handful of people from all Masonic lodges all over the world have been handpicked to understand what they're doing. And they give the orders, and they're carried out for world government. Albert Pike named this new organization the New and Reformed Palladian Rite. This was to supersede all Masonic lodges. There were 3 capitals for this organization, one in Charleston, South Carolina, one in Rome, Italy, the other in Berlin, Germany. A historian from Europe, a Dr. Batelli, wrote about this in his book, and it's a French name, so I'll not try to pronounce it here. Quote, "This super rite, which is Masonic Luciferian Spiritism, must not be confused with the machinery of high masonry. Palladism is the cult of Satan in the inner shrines of a rite superimposed on all the rites. It is a cult, a religion." End of quote. Now do we begin to see how Lucifer, or Satan the devil, is giving rise to an end-time global government. And in Revelation 13 it says it'll come up out of the sea. And the sea is mankind, the sea of humanity. And it's coming up all over the world at one time, because there are Freemasonic lodges in every nation on earth, even behind the iron and bamboo curtain. That's why it can rise everywhere at once. The religious dogma of Albert Pike was laid out in a document called the Instructions. He wrote this on July 14th of 1889. He wrote it and sent it to the 23 Supreme Councils of the world. Only those 23 masters of those councils was to ever read this document. It got into the wrong hands, and it was displayed in the British Museum of Natural History in the library for many, many years. 7 years ago, it disappeared. So this document cannot be proven that it exists except where other people had quoted it. I will now quote, "That which we, the high Palladian rite of Lucifer worshippers, must say to the crowd of Freemasonry is, we worship a God, but it is the God one adores without superstition." Notice, they said, we will admit and tell everyone else that we worship a God. But notice now what Albert Pike said, that those of the high degree who have been handpicked to know the secrets, who they were to worship. "But to you, sovereign grand instructors general, we say that you may repeat that to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. But the Masonic religion should be, by all of us initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the pure doctrine of Lucifer." Lucifer. He goes on in the same letter and explains how he believes that Lucifer is God, and the individual that we know of is Jesus Christ in the Bible. And in the Old Testament he was called Adonai, and that Adonai, or Jesus Christ, and Lucifer are both gods. That's what he says. But Lucifer is the God of light trying to help man, while Adonai, or Jesus Christ, is the God of darkness who hates people. He's got it just reversed. No wonder they're working so feverishly for world government. This is not just a political thing. This is spiritual to them. They're worshiping their God, and they're very fervent in doing so. And in the 4th paragraph of that particular letter, he said, yes, Lucifer is God. And unfortunately, Adonai is also God. Then in the last paragraph of that letter, he said the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy. And the true and pure philosophic religion is the belief in Lucifer. End of quote of that particular document. In another very remarkable letter that was dated August 15th of 1871, this also was in the British Museum of Natural History, the library of it in London, England, until both documents disappeared at the same time. Albert Pike laid out the final Luciferian plan for world government. This was to be culminated in the 20th century, and before the year 2000, they were to have their world government. He outlined in this document that they would, of necessity, have 3 world wars. And there would be many revolutionary wars that would be sidelined. And that they would happen all over the world. But on 3 different occasions, it would be a world war that would pull all governments into it at the same time. Notice what he said about this third one. How many have we had in the 20th century so far? 2. That means if he's correct, and they plan on having 3, there's 1 yet to come. 1 more to come. Here's what he said would happen after the Third World War. Quote, "We shall unleash the nihilist and atheist," these are the revolutionaries and the atheist, "and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all of its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of atheism, the origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil." So this is going to be a bloodbath on planet Earth, the Third World War. Why are they going to do this? Here's why. So that they will destroy the destroyers of civilization, and the multitudes of Christians will be disillusioned with Christianity. Why? Because they'll say, what God of love would let all these people be killed? And so they would lose faith in God. And then he said, we will destroy both atheism and Christianity at the same time and allow the pure doctrine of Lucifer to emerge. End of quote. Doesn't the Bible say that Satan will give rise and they're going to worship Satan? All these documents lay bare the plan for the Illuminati for the end of the age. They are working for their goal to be accomplished before the year 2000. They're very patient people, though. If they don't make it, then they'll just continue their program, but it'll take them a little longer. They actually wanted it to be finished in 1776 or 1976, the 200th anniversary of the United States. But they didn't make it. And Mr. Nixon wanted to be reelected, and he wanted to be the first world governor or king, the Antichrist. But he didn't make it, and he got a little cocky, so they framed him in the Watergate scandal and got rid of him. But of course, you'll notice he wrote his memoirs, and they made him a millionaire again. He was good to them. He followed orders. Well, on August 1st of 1951, the 82nd Congress approved a committee to direct a very thorough investigation of tax-exempt foundations in the United States. This committee was referred to as the Cox Committee. In its final report on January 1st of 1955, the Cox Committee stated, and this was their number one goal that they found, they said that there was a Moscow-directed program, a communist plot, to infiltrate every foundation in America and use the money, the funds of these tax-exempt foundations for their communist purposes. This can be found in document 2514 of the 82nd Congress, the second session. Congressman Reese, who served also on the Cox Committee, believed that the committee did not finish its investigation. So he asked the 83rd Congress to continue with the investigation. Mr. Rene A. Wormser, who happened to be a lawyer, he was the counsel for the Reese Committee. He later wrote a book called Foundations, Their Power and Influence. This was published by the Devon Adair Company of New York in 1958. Here are some of the conclusions that came out of that book. Mr. Norman Dodd was the director of research for the Reese Committee, their investigation into the tax-exempt foundations, and especially the Carnegie Endowment Foundation. I'm going to give parts of his speech that he made October 14th, 1976. Now, as a part of his investigation, Dodd received, by government order, the opportunity to go into the Carnegie Endowment Foundation and look at the minutes of their meetings. The conclusion was that he found in these minutes was that the Carnegie Endowment Foundation wanted to know, as far back as 1909, how they could change America's lifestyle so that they could make it a socialistic country and prepare it for world government. Their conclusion was the best way to alter all the neighborhoods of America was war. In less than 5 years, a war broke out called World War I. Now, the next question that they posed, and this was right in the minutes of the meetings, they're still there, was that how should we involve the United States in a war so that this process of changing the neighborhoods would begin? Their answer was that they had to infiltrate and control the diplomatic machinery of the United States. And the diplomatic machinery that is involved in foreign relations is the State Department. That was the determination that they came to. That was in 1909. Where are we today? They totally control every facet of our government today. Now, if we remember in the 1950s, there was a man by the name of Joseph McCarthy, and he had an investigation into the State Department of the United States. He found 81 people who were communist or communist sympathizers, and they ended up resigning. Then Mr. Scott McCloud, who headed up the security for the State Department, continued the investigation, and within 2 years he found 938 individuals in the State Department alone that were security risk for the United States. That's just one department. They succeeded in capturing the State Department. Well, with the United States' entrance into World War I, the Carnegie Endowment Foundation sent a telegram to President Wilson urging him not to end the war too quickly because they could already see the changes that were taking place in the neighborhoods of America. And it was the goals which they were working for. When the war was over, according to the minutes of the Carnegie Foundation that Mr. Dodd read with his own eyes and made copies of and included in their reports, they were confronted now with a new problem. How to prevent life in the United States from going back to what it was prior to World War I. Their conclusion was that they must control education in the United States. Now, this is the Illuminati working for world government. And the United States of America was declared a Christian country by the Supreme Court, February 29th of 1892. And now, all of a sudden, these conspirators for world government, following their father, Satan the devil, are now taking over the government of the United States. Now, according to the Carnegie Minute books that Mr. Dodd quoted, the trustees divided the task of education between themselves and the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation would alter education on certain domestic subjects, internal United States subjects, while the Carnegie Foundation would fund textbooks that would change international subjects and the teaching of international relations, so that our students would grow up with a totally slanted view of the truth of our past. Together, they decided that the teaching of American history must be revised, and they did it. In order to do this, they took young men, very high-quality men, high-bred from the Eastern establishment, Eastern socialism. They gave them Guggenheim Foundation grants that paid for an education in England. Then they came back and they founded the American Historical Society. These men were the ones who began to change the textbooks, just like the two foundations, the Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundation, said they had to do. And when they came back into America, it coincided with the appearance of book after book in which the contents began to cause doubt in the minds of young people as to whether George Washington and our founding fathers had truly founded the United States upon biblical and Christian principles, or whether they were just selfish aristocrats out for their own good. Well, this caused a furor back in the 30s, 40s, and early 50s, and there were organizations to combat this set up all across the country. This speech was given by Norman Dodd that relayed all this information. As America entered into the 1930s, the Commission of Social Studies of the American Historical Society, which was their new front organization, issued a document called Conclusions and Recommendations. This was in 1934. Even though this report was totally erroneous, flat out, they lied. They only laid down their own propaganda. Here's what they said. This was funded by the Carnegie Corporation. The report said that the age of individualism and individual liberty is coming to a close, and the time for the laissez-faire or free enterprise economies is coming to a close, and that a new age of collectivism is emerging. That's socialism. That's exactly what they were trained to tell the American people. It goes on in this book, and it says that collectivism is one of, I quote it, integration and interdependence. Has anybody heard the word interdependence in the last week's news programs? The ones I've seen, I've heard it at least 5 times, where the economies of the world are now becoming interdependent, and how we're now even financing the restructuring of the satellite nations of communism and making them interdependent so we can have global peace. This was way back in 1909 and forward into the 1930s when this came about. In their recommendations, this is in this document, Conclusions and Recommendations, they stated that all teachers must be free or must free themselves from all traditional academic pursuits. They must convert schools into a new way of creating a new society. And for the first time, this document used a term called change agent, which today, as I speak, is the official word of the government of the United States and the National Education Association for teachers. Change agents. Change from what? If we had a good educational system, why are they trying to change it? And why are teachers, without their knowledge, being used today as change agents? Here's what Mr. Wormser came down to as all the documentation that they got out of the Carnegie Minutes. He says, and I quote, in their recommendations, they call on teachers to free themselves from traditional academic pursuits and convert schools into agencies to create a new society. The school boards were to support a school program marked by transition to some form of socialized economy. End of quote. Mr. Harold J. Lasky, who was a British socialist, and he taught in the school systems in Britain, he testified before the Reese Committee. This was before the House Committee on Un-American Activities. I quote him, "At bottom and stripped of all its carefully neutral phrases, the report is an educational program for a socialistic America." End of quote. That was from the book put out by Mr. Wormser. So now do we see why our schools are in chaos? They are socializing our children, preparing them for the comfortable merger of all nations on the face of the earth. In the 1930s, a progressive educator by the name of John Dewey, he was the leading figure at this particular time. He was the head of the Teachers College at Columbia University. He became a very prominent man, the number one most influential man in America in education. In 1919, with Rockefeller Foundation money, he founded what was called the Progressive Education Association. This was to give the ideas into the school system of socialism and communism. There were other men who helped John Dewey. They were trained at the same time. Some of those was a Harold Ruggs, for those of you who remember him, a Mr. Counts, a Mr. Kilpatrick. All were identified by the government of the United States as socialist. So they were infiltrating to socialize the neighborhoods of America, because they had already said, give us 2 generations of your children without God in the classroom, and we've got America. A Mr. V.I. Lenin gave their program for world government. Here's what he said, I quote, "First we will take Eastern Europe, then the masses of Asia. Then we will encircle the United States, which will become the last bastion of capitalism." That's the free enterprise system. "We shall not have to attack." This was his opinion. They would not have to attack. "The United States will fall like a ripe grapefruit into our hands." End of quote. Socialism, by the year of 1905, had become a scare word in the United States. And this was even before the communist revolution that took over Russia. But the years from 1905 to 1955, there were certain people in the United States that were either outright Communist Party members, they were advisors to those individuals, they were cooperators with the socialists, or they received awards by the socialists. These were nationally known people such as Ralph Bunche, George S. Counts, educator, Clarence Darrah, Eugene Debs, John Dewey, and I'm listing these people for a purpose, which I'll explain in a minute. Senator Paul H. Douglas, David Dubinsky, Senator Hubert Humphrey, Max Lerner, Walter Lippmann, if many of you will remember, he was a famous radio commentator, George Meany, he was in labor unions, Senator Wayne Morris, A.J. Muskie, Reinhold Nyberg, Harry Overstreet, Walter Reuther, Eleanor Roosevelt, William Shirer, and the list could go on. But what I want you to realize is that within the framework of these individuals, they were across strata of every segment of the American life. Lawyers, doctors, educators, communication executive, international diplomacy individuals, government officials. They were influential people. And that is exactly what they laid down in 1848. They said they would have to infiltrate every government on earth. And those Western countries that did not have monarchs, they would infiltrate and legislate them into a world government without their knowledge. To be exact, Mr. Norman Thomas, who 6 times ran for the presidency of the United States on the socialist ticket in America, I quote him, "The American people will never knowingly adopt socialism, but under the name liberalism." Do we see the term liberal all the time in the media about a liberal senator, liberal congressman? They will adopt every fragment of the socialist program until America will one day be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened. End of quote. Remember, that was a socialist now. I want to quote a communist, a man by the name of Nikita Khrushchev, who happened to run the Soviet Union at the time he said this. 3 months before he came to the United States in 1959, he stated, and I quote, "We cannot expect the American people to jump from capitalism to communism, but we can assist their elected leaders in giving them small doses of socialism until they awaken one day to find they have communism." End of quote. Socialist and communist saying the same thing. The words are used by the Communist Party leaders interchangeably. And this will be important for what I have to say in my closing remarks. You must remember, socialism and communism are the same. There is no difference. Just the spelling. That's all. On April 24th of 1920, the Legislative Committee investigating seditious activities filed in the Senate of the state of New York a 4-volume report known as the Lusk Report. And the general introduction to Volume 1 states this, I quote, "Those representing the socialist point of view are the Socialist Party of America, the Communist Party of America, the Communist Labor Party, and the Socialist Labor Party. A study of their platforms and official pronouncements shows that they do not differ fundamentally in their objectives." And some of them were called socialist and some were called communist, weren't they? They don't differ in their objectives. Here's what their objectives are according to this 4-volume report. The establishment of a cooperative commonwealth in place of the present form of government in the United States. The overthrow of what they're pleased to call the capitalist system, namely the present system under which we live, and the substitution in its place of collective ownership and the management of the means of production and distribution of the working class. End of quote. That's pure and simple communism. That's what they want to hoist upon us. But how are they going to do that? They've had their strategy laid out for a long time. I'll examine the 10th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. It says that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, anything not specifically given to the federal government, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. End of quote from the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution of the United States does it give the federal government any power or control over education, and yet we have a Department of Education, don't we? They subsidize every single school district in America. That's important to understand. Nowhere does the Constitution give our federal government control over the health, welfare programs, labor, dams, public power projects, agriculture, and yet they're in every one of them, aren't they? Why is this so? Here's why. Because they said that they will one day, or we will one day wake up and be socialized by legislation, and we wouldn't even know it. Here's what they've done. In a Supreme Court case in 1942, the Wickard versus Filburn Act, this was the final sentence of the entire decision handed down. It is hardly a lack of due process for government to regulate that which it subsidizes. End of quote. Now do we understand why the federal government wants to subsidize everything there is? Even Christian colleges, through loans to students. And if they take loans, now they're trying to make it a subsidy to the college, because now they can regulate it. Centralized government is socialism. So they've had it planned for a long time. It's happening. In a speech in 1957, before the National Convention of the American Legion, J. Edgar Hoover, who was then director of the FBI, made the following statement, I quote, "To dismiss lightly the existence of the subversive movement or threat in the United States is to deliberately commit national suicide. In some quarters, we're doing exactly that." End of quote. He recognized what was happening. Now, the July 30, 1953 report of the Jenner Committee is probably one of the most comprehensive that has ever been carried out by the Subcommittee on Un-American Activities that was given before the Senate of the United States. Here are the conclusions of that committee. Number one, the Soviet International Organization, and remember, it was founded by the Illuminati, so communism is nothing but a front for the Illuminati. The Illuminati can be everywhere. Somebody could be in this room. In the Illuminati. They can be anywhere. But they created a seen enemy called communism to carry out their destructive purposes. Anyway, here's what they concluded. The Soviet International Organization has carried on a successful and important penetration of the United States government. And this penetration has not been fully exposed. Number two, this penetration has extended from the lower ranks to the top level policy and operating positions in our government. Number three, the agents of this penetration have operated in accordance with a distinct design fashioned by their Soviet superiors. And we know the Soviet superiors are the Illuminati. Number four, members of this conspiracy helped to get each other into government, helped each other to rise in government, and protected each other from exposure. Number five, in general, the communists who infiltrated our government work behind the scenes. They don't come out with their flags, say, hey, I'm a communist, this is my red flag. They don't do that. They work behind the scenes, guiding research. So when they come out with things saying that the environment is about to be destroyed, do we believe it? In some cases, it may be true. But in other cases, it's a communist plot for control over you and me. They also said they prepare memoranda on which basic American policies are set. They write speeches for cabinet officers. They influence congressional investigations so the truth cannot be told to the American public. Then they said that these individuals draft laws. Didn't Khrushchev say they would give us small doses of socialism till we wake up and we would be a socialist or communist country? They manipulate administrative reorganization, always serving the interest of their Soviet superiors. And the sixth-point policies and programs laid down by members of the Soviet conspiracy are still in effect within our government and constitute a continuing hazard to our national security. End of quote. So do we see way back in the 1950s, if they had this much control, where are they in the 1990s? They've had years to gain even further control. All right, to shake some of the cobwebs out of our minds, here are some of the programs they wanted to work in the United States to take us over and make us a socialized country for world government. There was 45 of those points put into the minutes, or there's a congressional program where anybody can read things into it, the congressional record. And this was put in there by W. Cleon Skousen, assistant to the FBI leader, J. Edgar Hoover, at the time. Here's some of the communist programs. They wanted to permit free trade between all nations. Have we passed that into law in the United States? President Ronald Reagan did it. Why is our economy in such a terrible shape? And we're the greatest debtor nation on earth, and yet we're the richest nation on earth. It doesn't even make sense, does it? But that's their program. Then they said they wanted to extend long-term loans to Russia and the Soviet satellites. That's Poland. That's Czechoslovakia. Because they knew they would never have to pay it back, because they will according to Nikita Khrushchev, bury us. Are we, as I'm speaking, going to give more money to the satellite countries of Russia? Yes, we are. We'll probably end up giving at least $100 billion to them and let our people go hungry. They also said they wanted the United States to provide foreign aid to every nation on earth. We've been doing that since the Foreign Aid Act was passed in 1946. Even every communist country receives foreign aid from the United States. They stated they wanted to set up East and West Germany as separate states. Did it happen after World War II? Yes, it did. And now they're talking about putting them back together again. But now Mr. Gorbachev says you can't do it unless Germany will be neutral. That means they will have to come out of NATO, and there goes the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Europe will be a neutral continent, and they will disarm, and they will be separated from the United States. Just what they want. That's their program. Destroy NATO, then we're disarming. Our own government has already said we're going to release 1/3 of our army and reduce the budget for military spending up to 50% within 5 years. That's what they want. The scarlet-colored beast is rising. Then another point, which you might realize has already happened. They said that they wanted to capture one or both political parties of the United States. That way, no matter which man ran for office, would be theirs. And they would continue to socialize America, and nobody would understand. We would scratch our head and say, yes, but he said. And yet, when you read the writings of the Revolutionary Catechism, it states very clearly they are to infiltrate. They are to lie and tell the people what they want to hear to get elected, then do the exact opposite as fast as they can when they get into office to destroy the country. That's what they've been doing. Then another program that they said was that they would have to infiltrate the court systems, and they would have to use technical decisions in order to weaken all the basic institutions of America, especially the courts. Do we see murderers turn free and rapists because they weren't read their rights? Yes, sir. Exactly what they said. Then they said they wanted to get control of the schools. We don't have public schools anymore. They are government schools. We have a government Department of Education. It reports directly to the President of the United States. Every school district receives subsidies, therefore they control and tell what is taught in those schools. There is no longer the teaching of reading, writing, and arithmetic in order to educate children to prepare them for life. They are change agents today. And those change agents are there for one reason: to develop socialistic minds in our children, not to prepare them to succeed in life. They also said they wanted to infiltrate the press. Have they done it? When Mr. Gorbachev came on the scene, didn't ABC, NBC, and CBS play him up as the man of the year? And Time magazine and so on? Because his perestroika and his glasnost program? And yet they've already had 5 previous glasnost programs. Where's Mr. Bush? Doesn't he know all these things? I mean, if a dummy like me knows them, surely he knows. 5 times the Soviet Union has had a glasnost program. And the last one was from 1975 to 1979. So surely he's been around to know. Well, another part of the program was that they were to gain control of key positions in radio, television, the motion picture industry, so that they could show perversion and break down the moral strata of society. They could depict Christian ministers as stupid and dumb and unintelligent. Do I need to say more? Said enough. They said that they wanted to eliminate all laws concerning obscenity. by using the phrase censorship and a violation of freedom of speech and freedom of press. See, they can hide behind the Constitution of the United States. But right now there has already been a decision that just happened this week in the courts of America that says your Fifth Amendment right not to testify against you yourself is gone. Yes, it's already been handed down. If you have a child in school, and if they have a bruise on them, maybe they were playing on a playground and they got kicked, you cannot testify, or you must testify and answer every question they say instead of giving the Fifth Amendment that you don't have to testify against yourself. They say child abuse, children are more important than the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. That was the exact words handed down by the court system. So the Fifth Amendment, for all practical purposes, from this week on, is gone. You'll never protect yourself again unless the Supreme Court overthrows it. But when you got over half of them Illuminati agents, they're not going to overthrow that. They said also, in order to break down the American social system, they wanted to promote homosexuality and all type of degeneracy and promiscuity as just natural. Well, everybody does it. Everybody cheats on their wife, their husband. Everybody does it. Kids have a right to use their body the way they want. The parents have no right to tell them, wait till you're married. And it's working. Then they said they wanted to infiltrate the churches. They would replace the revealed Word of God and the Bible as absolute with a social religion. They would discredit the Bible and emphasize intellectual maturity and not use religion as a crutch to hide behind. Has it worked? What about the National Council of Churches and the World Council of Churches, which were exposed on 60 Minutes as taking your money and other church members and funneling it to communist front organizations for the overthrow of governments in South Africa? They're the ones who are sending out the message of socialism and socialize the churches. They said they wanted to eliminate prayer or any phase of religion in the schools. Have they done it? Kentucky Supreme Court said, oh no, you can't put those 10 commandments up there. Somebody might believe there's a God. And they took them off the walls. And your children won't see it in school either. Then they said they would support all socialistic movements in order to centralize control over every part of our culture. So what have they done? They've centralized education. They've centralized social agencies. They've centralized the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, so that now it costs the oil companies when they were drilling in for the Alaska pipelines and so on, it cost them $2 million because one little nest was there with one egg in it, and they wouldn't let them go over that mountain. It might disturb the egg. So they had to go around that mountain. Well, these are just some things. They said that they wanted to eliminate laws and procedures that would interfere with the communist apparatus in America. They've done it. They said they wanted to discredit and dismantle the FBI. Have they done it? Yes. Out of 1,500 files they had on known communists and communist sympathizers, they had to destroy all of them but 55. All of them but 55. They said they wanted to eliminate the House Committee on Un-American Activities. That way there would be nobody to investigate socialism and a threat in America. It was disbanded in 1962. They wanted to infiltrate and gain control of big business and create monopolies in the marketplace. It's called corporate socialism. No matter what city you go to in America today, they have the same stores in all of them, don't they? I just drove down from St. Louis, Missouri by way of Virginia. And every town I went through, you could find a Wendy's, you could find a McDonald's, you could find all the chains all over the country. And every day on the news, you see where another corporate buyout's taking place. Yes, they said that they would buy corporations, create monopolies, so that when they pull the plug on the economy and cause a collapse, they will be the only ones to survive, and they will then set up a new system of economics. We know it as the mark of the beast. I'll get to that in a minute. They said they wanted to discredit the family as an institution, encourage extramarital affairs. They wanted to see to it the courts would allow easy divorce. Didn't that happen in about 80 or 79 or so on? When they said the only reason you have to have for divorce is incompatibility? No longer, as it was at one time, adultery. No, you can get out of a marriage nowadays for any reason. They said that they wanted to emphasize the rearing of children away from the parents and their negative influence. In other words, Christian influence. So what do we see being pushed by our president today? Child care centers all over America so moms can go and work and leave their children in our hands. Change agents. To change your children from Christianity to socialism. Then they said they wanted to overthrow all colonial governments as we gave them their freedom. What has happened on the African continent? Every country, before they know how to govern themselves, is overthrown by communists. Every one of them. And it's happened. And a final thing that I'll mention this evening, they said they wanted to repeal what was termed the Connelly Reservation Act. This act simply stated that the world court could not have jurisdiction over the internal affairs of the United States. They had to have a way around this. So they began to say, go all over the world and say, but you're abusing your people. And so they created what was called the Genocide Convention Treaty to the United Nations. The Genocide Convention Treaty gives permission for the world court to come into the United States and seize jurisdiction because our own Constitution states that a treaty with another government supersedes the Constitution of the United States. And all laws we make with foreign countries through treaty replaces our own Constitution. So now, if something were to happen and some emergency were to arise, they could take jurisdiction of our country. Does everybody remember the 1987 miniseries on ABC television called America? And it came on the scene in 1997, and the Soviet Union and the United Nations were occupying America. Now they have a legal right to do so. But has our government told us that? No, not at all. Well, Senator Thurman, Strom Thurmond, said that it does not matter whether you come under a socialist government or a communist government. He says they're identical, and he said under those systems, all liberty is forfeited. He said under those systems, there is no such thing as private property. And if you don't have the right to private property, then all your other rights are gone. Is he correct? Yes, he is. He knows what he's talking about. I want to give another quote now by a Mr. V.I. Lenin, first socialist dictator. In the book he published, Selected Works, Volume 7, page 298. Notice what he said. In another quote I gave, he said they would take Eastern Europe. They took that after World War II. Then they would take the masses of Asia. They did that. Then they would encircle the United States. They're doing it through Africa, and they're doing it through Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Cuba. They're doing it, just like he said. But he said they wouldn't have to attack because we would fall because of internal infiltration. Notice what he said here in this quote, though. As long as capitalism, that's us, and socialism exist, we cannot live in peace. So do we think Mr. Gorbachev is going to bring us peace? No. We still have capitalism. We still have communism. In the end, one or the other will triumph. A funeral dirge will be sung over the Soviet Socialist Republics or over world capitalism. End of quote. So Lenin laid down the doctrine that the United States and all capitalist countries must be converted to socialism or they would destroy them. Or capitalism would destroy the Soviet Union. I want to give another quote now. This quote was by a Mr. Dmitry Manilovsky, who was the professor of the Lenin School of Political Warfare in Moscow. This was given in 1937. I quote, "War to the hilt between communism and capitalism is inevitable." Remember, they said they'd have 3 wars, 3 world wars. Today, of course, we, the Soviets, are not strong enough to attack. Our time will come in 30 to 40 years. Well, it's been 50 now. To win, we shall need the element of surprise. The Western world will have to be put to sleep. So we shall begin. Begin what? Putting the Western world to sleep. By launching the most spectacular peace movement on record. Have we witnessed it? There has been nothing more spectacular than Gorbachev saying the satellites can become free, they can be democracies. Not one Soviet troop or tank has left one of those countries. Remember that. Not one KGB agent has given up his authority, turned in his badge, and fled to the West. They're all still in place. There shall be electrifying overtures and unheard of concessions. The capitalist countries, stupid and decadent. That's what Mr. Gorbachev thinks of you and me. Will rejoice to cooperate in their own destruction. Has America been sold a bill of goods, and the average person on the street and every talk show you hear on radio and television think communism's dead, it's no longer a threat? They will leap at another chance to be friends. As soon as their guard is down, we'll smash them with our clenched fist. End of quote. The number 1 graduating student in 1937 under Mr. Dmitry Manilovsky was Mikhail Gorbachev. Does that make sense? He's following his teacher's program to the letter. There is an organization called the Council on Foreign Relations. They lost no time in laying future plans for a socialistic world government. I'm going to give information from the State Department publication 2349. It's entitled Report to the President on the Results of the San Francisco Conference. This was written by the United States Secretary of State Edward Stettnes, and this was back in 1945. Quote, with the outbreak of war in Europe, that's World War II, it was clear that the United States would be confronted after the war with new and exceptional problems. Accordingly, a committee on post-war problems was set up before the end of 1939 at the suggestion of the Council on Foreign Relations. What is that organization? It was founded in 1919 by Edward Mandell House. He was a socialist. He wrote a book, Philip Drew Administrator, telling how they would socialize America by capturing one or both political parties of the United States and having their own members of Congress and Senate passing laws. So before World War II, the Council on Foreign Relations was already controlling our government. Who invited them in? Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his New Deal. Now, following Pearl Harbor and the attack on our ships, the Illuminati wasted no time in putting us into the war. A conference was called of all nations who was going to fight against Germany, Italy, and Japan, the Axis powers. This meeting was in Washington, D.C. early in 1942. the representatives of 26 nations issued a declaration of the United Nations. Now, the United Nations had never even been proposed until the Council on Foreign Relations proposed it, and now all of a sudden they supplanted allied powers with the term United Nations. What does this have to do with us? Well, number one, it helped develop support among the American people for our allies, including Russia, who fought on our side during the war, saying, look, we're all working together. It would make it easier to dissolve our nationalism as we have it today. Number two, and this is even more insidious, it served to condition the minds of our citizens to accept the Novus Ordo Seclorum, or the New World Order, because we accepted membership into the United Nations organization. Now, in another Life magazine, July 16th, 1945, told how right after the San Francisco Conference was over and the charter had been written for the United Nations, and the United States sent it to Washington and to the Senate to be ratified. Notice what else happened. Here is a quote from Political Affairs, which was the official journal of the Communist Party USA in April of 1945. Notice what it says. I quote, "Great popular support and enthusiasm for the United Nations policies should be built up, well organized and fully articulated. But it is also necessary to do more than that." In other words, we're not just going to tell the American people and get them stirred up so that we can go into the United Nations, but notice what else they said we're going to do. The opposition to our entry into the United Nations must be rendered so impotent that it will be unable to gather any significant support in the Senate against the UN Charter and its treaties. End of quote. So the communists were working overtime to guarantee we would sign a treaty to go into the United Nations organization. Why? Because it's their blueprint for the Novus Ordo Seclorum, or New World Order. Now, the founders of the United Nations organization and all of their successors have proved to be masters of deceit. They have used the United Nations and propaganda about it to say that it promotes peace, justice, freedom, and the rights of individuals. And yet every nation where the United Nations peacekeeping troops, up through the 1975 year, every nation where they went, it was overthrown for communism. Every time. To be exact, all individuals who represented the United States of America at the San Francisco Conference from the Treasury and State Department were later identified in our own government files as known communists. Every one of them, except one. His name was Dean Acheson, Secretary of State. Mr. Dean Acheson at that time just happened to be the personal lawyer in the United States for Joseph Stalin. He also helped in the overthrow of China for communism. And all this information was found in the post-war foreign policy preparation for 1935 to 1945, showing that the United Nations organization was founded by communists and we were put into it to promote a communist world government. Also, the number one organization within the United Nations that keeps the peace all over the world is called the Political and Security Council Affairs. Since its inception, the head of the military for the United Nations organizations, without exception, has been a communist. No American has ever held a post. One Yugoslavian communist, and all the rest were Russian communist. You can go to the library and look up The Columbia University is the one who worked with the United Nations organization. It's the United Nations yearbook published by Columbia University, and that's where this information was found. They did it because the United States government agreed in advance that they would trust the communists and Russia with world peace. Well, what does this have to do with us? I'm going to bring it up to the moment now and then start bringing it to a close. On May 2nd of 1974, the United Nations organization formed the new International Economic Order. The preamble to this new International Economic Order states, and I quote, "We, the members of the United Nations," that's America, "solemnly proclaim our united determination to work urgently for the establishment of a new international economic order based on equity, sovereign equality." Remember what they said back in 1929? Equality for all. And they would use that, and it would make communism palatable. Notice what else it says. Interdependence. Common interest and cooperation among all states, irrespective of their economic and social system. Now do we understand why in secret, while Mr. Gorbachev is claiming to be bringing peace, multinational corporations in the United States have just recently, within the last 6 months, invested $30 billion behind the iron and bamboo curtain? Because we've got to make all countries of the world interdependent so that we'll all have a one-world economic system. And eventually the time will come when they will say no man can buy and sell without the mark. And if you go out to the grocery store, you can see little lines all over the products on the grocery shelves. They run it across a computer. It's a scanner, and the computer just reads the little symbols and tells what it is. My final two little sections now in my message this evening is right up to date, Mr. Gorbachev. The Soviet Union has a strategic deception goal against the United States. A man by the name of J. Edward Epstein authored a book called Legend and Inquest. He also has written a new book. It's entitled Deception, the Invisible War Between the KGB and the CIA. This is published by Simon & Schuster. He took a speech by one of Gorbachev's right-hand men to show their strategic deception, and the glasnost is a lie. It's a deception to bring about world government, to disarm America, and to cause Europe to be neutral and the United States to withdraw our troops from Europe. Then they can't defend themselves. So the Soviet Union then could blackmail them into submission. Of course, the Illuminati is the one who rules the Soviet Union. And the United States, when we disarm, because after all, Gorby told us that they're not a threat to us anymore. So, of course, he's such a nice guy, a fatherly figure or grandfatherly figure. We believe him, don't we? Well, the members of the Illuminati do, because they're working with him. And another thing that is happening all at the same time, to make everything look good in the world. Do you realize there's only one country left that does not want to go into a world government? The Union of South Africa. So now they've orchestrated a new election down there, and a man by the name of de Klerk became head of South Africa. The United States in 1985 and 6 had already passed sanctions against South Africa. We required by law that all corporations withdraw their trade with South Africa. What this effectively did was throw millions of black workers out onto the streets. Because South Africa, the blacks earn 5 times as much as they did in any other country on the continent of Africa. And so 500,000 foreigner blacks from South Africa would get special visas to go in and work in South Africa. So things were so good, they didn't want to go into a communistic, socialistic world government. So the Illuminati had to find a way to destroy the good life that the blacks have in South Africa. Not every one of them, just like America. Not everybody is rich and wealthy. We know that. But it's the most prosperous country in Africa. So, they withdrew all companies. This threw the people into turmoil because they lost their economic base. This is the black population. And then a new man goes into the presidency, a Mr. de Klerk. Mr. de Klerk says, we will let Mr. Nelson Mandela go free. ABC, NBC, and CBS networks in America all shut down, preempted everything they were going to show on Sunday, the 11th of February, 1990. And they showed Mr. Mandela's speech. Mr. Mandela held up his fist, clenched fist. Then he threw up the other one and had both clenched fists in the air. And he said, we'll continue our armed struggle till the end. Then Newsweek magazine came out with a front cover showing that Mr. Mandela is free. And it goes all the way through this article, and it never tells the truth, not in one place. I'm going to tell you the truth this evening. It only tells you that Mr. Mandela was put into prison because he wanted the apartheid system, forced segregation in South Africa, to stop. That wasn't why he was imprisoned. I'll tell you why he was imprisoned. And this makes more sense than anything you'll ever hear, because it's the truth. And it's documented right in newspapers. Back in 1964, Mr. Mandela at that time headed the African National Congress, which was a Soviet-dominated organization, revolutionary organization, a terrorist organization. Him and 9 other men, Nelson Mandela, were put on the list of the 10 most wanted men because of their objective of overthrowing the government of South Africa for communism and socialism. That's why he was put into prison. He was offered 20 separate times to be released if he would sign a statement saying that he would never again promote armed overthrow of the country of South Africa, and he wouldn't do it. Because the minute he got out, he raised his clenched fist. What did the gentleman back in 1937 that headed up the Lenin Political Warfare School say? He said, when their guard is down, we'll smash them with a clenched fist. The clenched fist is not a black power movement sign. It is a sign of smashing capitalism on a world program. So Mr. Mandela is still at it. And here I want to give absolute documentation. The trial was referred to as the Ravona case. Nelson Mandela was the leader of the African National Congress. He was one of the 10 accused. He pleaded guilty to 3 of the 4 charges. He admitted to planning violent revolution. A document in his handwriting was produced in which he stated that the capitalist system in South Africa would be destroyed and replaced by a socialist state, and declared that the people must be revolutionaries, not reformers. Don't reform the system, destroy it. I'll continue. This was a document found in his own handwriting, presented at his trial that convicted him. We of the Communist Party, didn't he say he was a communist? Are the most advanced revolutionaries in modern history. And we are the fighters of the drive behind the plan to revolutionize the world. That's why ABC, CBS, and NBC, and Time Magazine had to promote him as a heroic person, because they are controlled by the Council on Foreign Relations, a socialist organization working for world government. And the last statement in his own handwriting, in South Africa, the Communist Party is carrying on the struggle for the oppressed, and it is inspired by our policy. End of quote. My final words to you this evening before we break up is that Jesus Christ is in charge of everything. We should not fear what is taking place in the world. The reason I talk of Bible prophecy is because when I was ordained into the ministry, a man laid hands on me and he said, set him apart for the ministry of prophecy. That's why I speak prophecy. I speak it often. And for some reason, God has allowed me to understand what is really going on and allowed documents to come into my hands to prove what I'm saying so nobody can refute what I say. Nobody has ever taken me to court because they could do it if I didn't have the documents to prove it. But God has given these things to me in many different ways and by different people. And I'm thankful for it. My purpose for being here this evening is to call upon you, if your life is not right and fully dedicated to Jesus Christ, to repent. Get your life right with Him. And if you do not understand the Bible, there are people who will help you so that you can learn more of the true doctrine of Jesus Christ. Because here's what's going to happen just ahead of us. It's not going to be but a short time. I'm going to read Isaiah 24, just a few verses. And this is going to be allowed by our Savior, Jesus Christ. And there's a reason for it. In Isaiah 24, I'll read the last phrase in verse 18 and go right into verse 19. The foundations of the earth do shake. This could not even have been understood until our day, our lifetime. With the extremely low frequency magnetic waves, 2 generators, one in the Soviet Union and one outside Seattle, Washington, putting these extremely low frequency magnetic waves hitting the core of the earth, coming up and into the ionosphere and creating giant walls to divert the jet stream and create famine or tons of rain whenever they want to. Now, these extremely low frequency magnetic waves are heating up the nickel core of the earth. That's why there's an increase in earthquake activity. To be exact, they said it on ABC News that the San Francisco earthquake was caused and traces of extremely low frequency magnetic waves was its cause. It appeared one time in a 30-second statement and never again did it appear, except in a newspaper. But yes, that's the reason. Why did Mount St. Helens blow out the side of the mountain? The first one in history to do it. Because of the extremely low frequency, magnetic waves blew it out the side of the mountain instead of erupting up the top. These things are going to destroy the earth to the point where it's going to have a boiling over effect down in the core of the earth. And when it does that, earthquake activity, then you're going to have volcanic activity. And didn't the Soviet Union say they would have to bring, or the Illuminati, they would have to bring about a great cataclysm between Christianity and atheism that would destroy so many people that we would cry out for world government? Well, if you unleash a few 50 megaton bombs, it will knock the earth out of its orbit. With the breakdown of the ozone layer, it will come too close to the sun and it will scorch men, just like the book of Revelation says. We are living in these times. Verse 19, the earth is utterly broken down. The earth is clean dissolved. It doesn't mean it's running like water. No, it just means the ecosystem. It means all the systems, even the magnetic system of the earth that keeps it in perfect orbit. And that's why it's going to wobble like a drunk man. Verse 20, the earth shall reel to and fro like a drunkard, because we are breaking down the whole earth's systems. Now, why is it happening though? Verse 1 of the same chapter, 24. Behold, the Lord makes the earth empty. It says the Lord's doing all this. He's allowing it to happen because mankind has not learned their lessons. Notice down in verse 3, the land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled, for the Lord has spoken this word. The earth mourns and fades away, the world languishes and fades away, and the haughty people of the earth do languish. Notice verse 5. The earth also is defiled. Get you a Strong's Concordance of the Hebrew Greek language. Look up that Hebrew word defile. It means polluted under the inhabitants thereof. What about our oceans? What about our non-salt water streams and tributaries? You can't drink out of the Mississippi River. You're afraid to get in it, your foot might disappear. Notice why all this is going to be allowed to happen. Because that's the inhabitants of the earth. Are we part of those inhabitants? Yes, we are. And unless we know what true repentance is so we can get on God's side, we are responsible too for this breakdown. Because they have transgressed the laws, God's laws. You know what? The church I went to when I was growing up told me God's laws were done away. How can you have sin if there's no law to break? Romans 5 says that there can't be any sin imputed if there's no law to break. Changed the ordinance and broken the everlasting covenant. Most in Christianity shake their head at me when I say God made an everlasting covenant with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They broke it. Then He remade it with Adam. And it says so in Psalms 105 verse 7 through 9. He made it with Adam, or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And He gave it to Israel for a law for an everlasting covenant. And then Jesus came, in Hebrews 13 it said He came and shed the blood of the everlasting covenant. There's only been one way from Adam till Jesus comes back for everybody. But all the churches teach 1,000 different ways. No, there's only one way. But that's why the earth is going to crumble. And Jesus is going to let it happen. And at the very last minute, according to Matthew 24, verse 21 and 22, He's going to come and stop world suicide. And that's the good news for us. He's going to stop it. Brethren, I want to thank you for allowing me to come. Maybe I just intruded upon you. I sent a letter and said I'm coming. But I'm thankful that those of you who did come came out. I did announce on there that we were going to take up a donation. Normally I don't like to do this. But for some reason in the last 2 years, I found that Jesus said, ask and you shall receive. I never asked for donations before until about 2 years ago. But we need it to stay on Channel 22. Whether you realize it or not, I'm going to tell you this. Channel 22 is our #1 station in the entire country. More people respond to Channel 22 in the Tampa, Clearwater, St. Pete area than any other television station in the country. So you should be thankful that you do have a station where people can receive some type of information that will help them face the times ahead. I'm going to give a prayer this time, and then I'll ask that the basket be passed. If you do not have a donation and you cannot give it, don't you do it. I'd rather you eat. But if you have been blessed of God and you can help us to pay our bills over there, please do. God will bless you for it. Let's bow our head, please. Eternal Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for your Son Jesus. He's everything to us. He bought us back from sin when we deserved nothing but death. And now we have life and the future looking us right in the face. We know that Jesus Christ in us can overcome all things, even death. And if this end-time system, which your scriptures say will persecute and kill many Christians, the next thing we know will be a resurrection from the dead. We have the victory in Christ Jesus. We thank you for that. And now this evening, Father, for those who do have something that they can give to help us with our outreach program, lay it upon their hearts to do so. But Father, those who do not, we're thankful that they're here so they can enjoy the Word from your Bible also. So we thank you and honor you in Jesus' name. Amen.